Being a 34-year-old corporate accountant in Seattle did not prepare me, Harper, for the absolute nightmare of seeing my living room furniture dumped carelessly on my own muddy front lawn. My mother stood rigidly on the porch with her arms crossed, watching a heavy moving crew carry my late grandmother's irreplaceable antique dining table out the front door. My younger sister Chloe leaned casually against the door frame, sipping lazily from a coffee cup I had personally bought just yesterday morning. "The transfer is complete, Harper, so you have until tonight to get your trash off the property," my mother announced loudly over the pouring rain. She held up a thick manila folder, tapping the signature line with her manicured fingernail. "The general power of attorney I signed last month. The document she swore was strictly to handle local property taxes while I was on a corporate retreat, had been fully weaponized. They had legally sold my house right out from under me. Chloe needs a proper venue for her luxury wedding reception, and this property was the only liquid asset we could leverage," my mother continued. Her tone remained entirely devoid of guilt, sounding more like a ruthless bank manager, denying a loan than a parent destroying her own daughter. She casually adjusted her silk scarf, refusing to even meet my gaze. "You are single and make a decent salary, so you can easily rent a small apartment downtown." The real estate agent stepped out from the kitchen, nodding politely as he handed Chloe a fresh set of shiny brass keys. My sister smiled brightly, tossing the heavy keys into the air and catching them with a smug, self-satisfied grin. "Thanks for the ultimate wedding gift, big sister," Chloe said, her voice dripping with venomous fake gratitude. I stepped aggressively onto the porch, reaching desperately for the legal folder, but my mother yanked it away and stepped quickly behind the burly moving men. My chest tightened as the brutal reality of the situation finally settled deeply into my bones. The house my grandmother left exclusively to me, the quiet sanctuary I had spent years restoring, now legally belonged to a stranger who had immediately leased it to my sister. The power of attorney was utterly ironclad, leaving me absolutely zero legal recourse to stop the catastrophic transaction today. The cold Seattle rain began to fall heavier, soaking rapidly through my wool coat and dripping steadily down my face. My mother loudly ordered the movers to carry the rest of my box belongings out to the sidewalk, treating my entire life like worthless garbage to be collected. They had meticulously planned this cruel ambush for weeks, timing the final closing for the exact afternoon I was busy finalizing a massive quarterly audit at work. My own family had effectively rendered me homeless just to fund a grotesque display of wealth for a single party. "If you try to cause a scene or call the police, I will show them the contract," my mother warned sharply. "This is a civil matter now, and you know the authorities will never intervene against a legally binding signature." She was entirely correct about the law, and that sickening realization tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. As a corporate accountant, I understood the absolute finality of a notarized signature on a sweeping legal document. I had trusted my mother with my financial safety, and she had weaponized that trust to legally rob me blind. I watched silently as the movers dropped a heavy cardboard box onto the wet pavement, the bottom splitting open to spill my personal documents onto the muddy grass. Chloe walked slowly down the porch steps, holding a large designer umbrella over her head while deliberately stepping heavily on my ruined paperwork. She worked as a mid-level manager at Vance Corporation, a prestigious logistics firm where she constantly bragged about her inflated corporate budget. She had always demanded the absolute finest things in life, and my mother had always happily destroyed anyone who stood in the way of those endless demands. Now, my entire net worth had been permanently sacrificed to pay for floral arrangements and a designer dress. "Do not leave a mess on the public sidewalk," Chloe ordered, kicking a soggy envelope toward my leather boots. "My elite wedding planner is coming over tomorrow morning to carefully measure the garden, and I want the exterior looking absolutely perfect." I slowly knelt in the freezing mud, gathering my scattered documents with trembling fingers. A profound, terrifying calmness suddenly washed over my mind, entirely replacing the initial shock and crushing grief. I was not going to scream, I was not going to beg, and I was certainly not going to cry pathetically in front of them. I quietly packed the meager remnants of my life into the trunk of my car while my family watched with quiet amusement from the dry warmth of the porch. Starting my engine, I pulled smoothly away from the curb without looking back at the house that was no longer mine. I drove directly toward a cheap highway motel on the bleak outskirts of the city, my mind already shifting away from victimhood and locking onto a singular, cold objective. Chloe had stolen my sanctuary to fund her perfect corporate fairy tale, completely forgetting that I was a certified master of auditing corporate greed. Tomorrow morning, I would officially begin dismantling her entire world from the inside out. The faded neon sign of the highway motel buzzed loudly as I carried my single damp suitcase into an aggressively cheap, poorly lit room. I locked the flimsy wooden door behind me, tossing my wet coat onto the cold radiator before opening my laptop on the scratched desk. The dead silence of the room was deafening, a sharp, painful contrast to the wealthy neighborhood I had been violently expelled from just hours ago. I urgently needed to assess the total scope of the financial damage my mother had ruthlessly inflicted. Logging into my JP Morgan Chase banking portal, I realized the family betrayal ran much deeper than just the real estate transaction. My mother had used the same broad power of attorney to completely drain my emergency savings account, transferring the massive balance to a hidden joint account she shared with my sister. They had deliberately left me with exactly enough money to survive for 2 weeks, meticulously calculating the precise amount needed to keep me desperate but alive. This was not merely a theft. It was a deliberate, calculated execution of my financial independence. I pulled up Chloe's public social media profiles, watching a live video she had just posted directly from my former living room. She was excitedly showing off the antique fireplace to her thousands of followers, claiming she and her fiancé had purchased the estate through sheer hard work. Her fiancé stood quietly in the background wearing a custom Italian suit, entirely oblivious to the fact that his future wife was a ruthless, thieving parasite. Chloe loved playing the role of the self-made corporate superstar. My eyes drifted sharply to the Vance Corporation logo heavily featured in her professional online profile. Chloe managed their regional vendor contracts, a critical position that required immense trust and handled millions of dollars in corporate funds. As a senior accountant who had spent a decade relentlessly hunting down financial anomalies, I knew that people who stole comfortably from their own family rarely kept their hands clean at work. If Chloe felt entitled to my house, she undoubtedly felt entitled to her employer's money. I opened a highly secure browser window and began searching for executive contacts deeply within Vance Corporation. I did not need to confront Chloe directly, nor did I need to waste years fighting a losing battle in a slow civil court over a legally binding signature. I needed to bypass the standard corporate hierarchy entirely and go straight to the absolute top of the food chain. I successfully found the direct corporate email from Mr. Vance, the notoriously ruthless chief executive officer globally known for his absolute zero-tolerance policy on corporate fraud. Drafting the crucial email required cold, calculated precision, completely stripping away any emotional family drama. I introduced myself as an independent forensic accountant, offering to conduct a shadow audit of the regional vendor contracts completely off the official corporate books. I highlighted 3 specific structural vulnerabilities in their public vendor management system, mathematically proving my expertise in exactly the area my sister actively managed. I did not mention Chloe by name, nor did I mention my stolen house. I can officially expose the invisible leaks in your regional budget within exactly 30 days, I typed. I hit send, leaning back in the cheap plastic chair as the laptop screen faded to black. The power dynamic had fundamentally shifted the moment I decided to completely stop fighting them on their own legal terms. My mother and sister thought they had permanently ruined me by stealing my physical sanctuary and my life savings. They had fundamentally failed to understand that taking away my comfort had simply removed all my moral restraints. Let Chloe have her perfect wedding venue. I was going to burn her career entirely to the ground. Mr. Vance never replied to my email. He simply sent a black town car to my motel. The heavy luxury vehicle sat idling beneath the flickering neon sign precisely at 6 o'clock the next morning. My phone vibrated aggressively on the cheap laminate nightstand, displaying a single text message from a blocked caller identity. The message coldly instructed me to grab my laptop, check out of the room, and step outside immediately. I had genuinely expected a slow, bureaucratic corporate vetting process, perhaps a cautious virtual meeting with a mid-level human resources manager. Instead, the notoriously elusive and deeply intimidating chief executive officer of Vance Corporation was apparently demanding an immediate, completely off-the-books meeting. I threw my damp coat over my shoulders and walked out into the freezing dawn air. The silent, professionally dressed driver navigated the slick, rain-soaked Seattle streets, deliberately bypassing the towering downtown corporate headquarters entirely. We smoothly pulled into the secure underground parking garage of an exclusive, hypermodern private members club nestled quietly near the waterfront. I gripped my worn leather briefcase tightly against my chest, quickly smoothing down the stubborn wrinkles in my only dry-cleaned blazer. My mother and Chloe had ruthlessly stripped me of my physical home and my life savings in one afternoon, but they could never confiscate my 10 years of grueling, highly specialized corporate accounting experience. I stepped confidently out of the luxury vehicle and was immediately escorted down a long, windowless hallway into a dimly lit, perfectly soundproofed private dining room. Alexander Vance sat completely alone at the end of a long mahogany table, nursing a steaming cup of black coffee while intensely reviewing a thick stack of printed financial charts. He was a sharp, imposing man in his late 50s, radiating the kind of quiet, terrifying authority that could instantly silence a crowded corporate boardroom. He did not bother standing up or offering a polite, customary handshake when I slowly entered the silent room. He simply tapped a heavy gold pen against a specific highlighted row on his complex documents and gestured firmly for me to sit in the empty leather chair directly opposite him. "Your email was bold, incredibly specific, and mathematically flawless," Mr. Vance stated coldly, his piercing dark eyes locking intensely onto mine. "However, I ran a comprehensive background check the second your message hit my private server last night. I know exactly who you are, Harper. More importantly, I know that your younger sister Chloe is my senior regional vendor manager. So, tell me why a respected corporate accountant suddenly wants to perform a shadow audit on her own flesh and blood." I did not flinch under his heavy gaze, nor did I offer him a tearful, emotional story about my stolen grandmother's house or my completely drained bank accounts. I desperately needed him to see a ruthless, calculating professional, not a pathetic victim seeking petty family revenge. "Chloe is recklessly using your corporate logistics budget as her personal luxury piggy bank," I answered evenly, keeping my voice utterly devoid of hesitation. "You already suspect there is a massive internal leak, which is exactly why you agreed to this meeting today. I am offering you the precise surgical knife required to quietly cut the infection out of your company without triggering a massive public shareholder panic." Mr. Vance stared at me in heavy, suffocating silence for a long moment, carefully evaluating the absolute certainty echoing in my voice. He slowly slid a sleek silver encrypted hard drive across the polished wooden table, followed closely by a heavily redacted, ironclad non-disclosure agreement. "This drive contains unrestricted read-only access to every single regional vendor invoice processed over the last 12 months, he explained softly. "You have exactly 1 week to build an airtight, undeniable paper trail. If you are wasting my time with petty sibling rivalry, I will personally ensure you never work in corporate finance anywhere in the United States ever again. I will have her complete criminal profile mapped out in 3 days," I promised firmly, signing the sweeping legal document without a single second of hesitation. Returning quickly to my bleak motel room, I immediately plugged the heavily encrypted drive into my laptop. The sheer overwhelming volume of raw financial data would have instantly paralyzed a novice accountant, but to me, it was a perfectly illuminated treasure map of my sister's monumental arrogance. I began aggressively cross-referencing Chloe's approved corporate vendor payments with her highly publicized, deeply narcissistic wedding updates on social media. The blatant, sloppy corruption revealed itself within the very first hour of my deep dive. Chloe had brazenly established a completely fictitious logistics consulting firm legally registered under her new fiancé's middle name. She was methodically funneling regular, massive monthly payments to this ghost entity, creatively labeling them as crucial supply chain training seminars. Just last week, she had formally authorized a $30,000 corporate payout to this entirely fake company. Simultaneously, she had loudly bragged online about booking a premier luxury catering service for her wedding reception that coincidentally cost exactly $30,000. She was not even trying to cover her financial tracks properly. She genuinely, foolishly believed she was entirely untouchable in her corporate castle. The deeper I dug into the Vance Corporation server, the more horrifying her financial entitlement became. Chloe had also recently submitted a massive expense report for a fake executive team-building retreat located in Napa Valley. The itemized receipts listed premium wine tastings and exclusive resort accommodations supposedly meant for 10 senior logistics directors. I instantly matched those exact dates and locations to her lavish bachelorette party pictures plastered all over her public profiles. She was forcing Mr. Vance to unknowingly bankroll her entire bridal party's weekend getaway, treating a multi-million-dollar corporate account like her own limitless personal checking account. My phone suddenly vibrated aggressively on the scratched wooden desk, shattering my intense concentration. It was an unsolicited group text message from my mother, proudly attaching a high-resolution photo of Chloe standing elegantly in an elite downtown bridal boutique. Chloe was wearing a custom-made imported silk gown that easily cost more than a standard luxury vehicle. My mother had deliberately added a toxic caption, specifically meant to humiliate my current situation. Chloe looks like absolute royalty today, proving that true success naturally comes to those who prioritize family over selfish career ambitions, the cruel text read. They were happily spending the stolen money from my forced house sale while simultaneously bleeding Vance Corporation completely dry. I stared blankly at the glowing photograph of my smiling, victorious sister, then looked slowly back at the glaring spreadsheet of her mounting corporate felonies. Every single time she swiped a stolen credit card or approved a fake invoice, she was happily hammering another solid iron nail into her own federal prison cell. I carefully highlighted the fraudulent dress purchase in bright neon red on my official audit report, meticulously documenting the exact time and computer address of her digital approval signature. Let them enjoy their expensive imported silk and stolen vintage champagne this afternoon. Chloe had absolutely no idea that her older sister was currently holding the legal detonator to her entire fabricated existence. I decided to test my newly granted administrative authority over my sister's fraudulent corporate budget the very next morning. I sat in my dim, freezing motel room on the bleak outskirts of Seattle, drinking terrible bitter instant coffee while watching Chloe's company credit card activity broadcast live across my highly secure monitor. Mr. Vance had given me absolute unrestricted access to the central financial nervous system of his logistics empire. I was no longer just a betrayed older sister. I was the invisible digital executioner waiting patiently in the shadows. Chloe was predictably arrogant. According to her meticulously curated public social media schedule, today was her exclusive bridal floral consultation at the most expensive botanical design studio in the entire Pacific Northwest. She had been aggressively promoting this lavish appointment online for several weeks, arrogantly promising her thousands of followers a breathtaking, immersive display of imported orchids and rare white roses. I watched the blinking digital ledger closely, waiting for the inevitable authorization request to hit the Vance Corporation server. At exactly 11 o'clock, the pending transaction flashed brightly across my laptop screen. Chloe was attempting to charge $45,000 for custom floral arrangements, brazenly categorizing the massive luxury expense as a regional logistics warehouse decoration budget. My finger hovered calmly over the keyboard. I did not just hit the standard temporary decline button. Using the elite executive administrative credentials Mr. Vance had personally provided, I permanently flagged the account for severe internal fraud, instantly locking every single corporate card issued under Chloe's entire regional management department. I desperately wanted to witness the exact moment her fabricated reality shattered into pieces. I opened a secondary secure window and dialed the prestigious floral studio directly, utilizing a specialized software that effectively masked my caller identity as the official Vance Corporation internal fraud department. A polite, highly stressed boutique manager answered the phone almost immediately, apologizing profusely for the sudden, embarrassing payment issue. I am calling to officially inform you that the platinum corporate card presented by Chloe is currently under active federal investigation, I stated in a cold, practiced corporate monotone. Please confiscate the physical card immediately and politely ask the client to leave your premises, or we will involve local Seattle law enforcement. I continued seamlessly, projecting absolute, terrifying authority. I could clearly hear the muffled, chaotic shouting echoing in the background of the call. Chloe was screaming hysterically at the bewildered boutique staff, demanding they run the magnetic strip again, loudly threatening to destroy their entire business reputation on social media. The polite manager hastily agreed to my strict instructions and ended the call, leaving me in absolute, deeply satisfying silence. Less than 20 minutes later, my personal cell phone began ringing frantically on the scratched wooden desk. The caller identification boldly displayed my mother's name. I let it ring 3 distinct times, deliberately allowing her mounting anxiety to peak before calmly answering the call. I genuinely expected a vicious, screaming tirade about my sudden departure from the house yesterday, but instead, her voice was completely panicked, entirely stripped of her usual arrogant superiority. "Harper, you need to drive to the downtown bank immediately and co-sign an emergency loan," she demanded breathlessly, not even bothering to say a basic hello. "Chloe is trapped at the luxury floral boutique, and the vendor is actively threatening to call the police over a cancelled payment. We absolutely cannot afford a public scandal," my mother continued rapidly, her breathing shallow and frantic. I leaned back in my cheap plastic chair, a cold, genuine smile slowly spreading across my tired face. "Why do you need my signature?" I asked softly. "You legally stole my entire house and drained my life savings. Pay the florist with your own stolen money." "We spent it all," she snapped defensively, her voice pitching violently into a desperate shriek. "The elite country club and the imported silk dress designer demanded massive upfront payments yesterday. Your pathetic savings barely covered the luxury deposits. Take out a personal loan today, or I will officially disown you forever." I actually laughed out loud, the sharp, unfamiliar sound echoing strangely inside the bleak motel room. They had ruthlessly burned through 10 grueling years of my financial savings in less than 48 hours, entirely consumed by their toxic, bottomless greed. Now, completely cut off from Chloe's fraudulent corporate lifeline, they were hopelessly drowning in the massive financial commitments they had arrogantly made. "You cannot disown a daughter you already made homeless," I replied with chilling, absolute calmness. "Good luck dealing with the police, mother." I ended the call immediately and permanently blocked her personal number. The brief emotional victory was incredibly sweet, but my professional mission for Mr. Vance was far from over. Freezing the corporate credit card was merely a localized tactical strike meant to rattle her nerves and publicly humiliate her. I still needed to deliver the ultimate legal killing blow to her entire career. I returned my absolute focus to the encrypted hard drive, digging aggressively into the ghost consulting firm Chloe had registered under her fiancé's middle name. I needed undeniable, concrete proof that the stolen corporate funds were not just being wasted on lavish wedding cake, but actively being laundered into private, untraceable offshore accounts. As I meticulously cross-referenced the fake company's routing numbers with international banking databases, a massive, terrifying red flag suddenly materialized on my monitor. Chloe was not acting alone in this massive financial crime. The secondary authorization signatures on the fraudulent international bank transfers did not belong to my sister. They belonged to the senior vice president of Vance Corporation. Chloe was not just a petty corporate thief stealing dresses. She was an active pawn in a massive multi-million-dollar executive embezzlement ring. I was sitting entirely alone in a cheap motel, holding the explosive, highly classified evidence that could easily bring down the entire corporate empire. I did not wait for Alexander Vance to politely summon me this time, nor did I rely on his silent driver to navigate the slick morning streets. I immediately drafted a highly encrypted, single-sentence email demanding an emergency, strictly in-person meeting at his towering downtown Seattle corporate headquarters. Within exactly 15 minutes, my phone displayed a secure building access code and strict instructions to use the private executive freight elevator, entirely bypassing the crowded public lobby. Walking through the pristine, glass-walled corridors of Vance Corporation wearing my only wrinkled blazer felt deeply surreal, but I carried the explosive silver hard drive like a loaded weapon. My sister had unknowingly handed me the exact, devastating coordinates needed to destroy not only her pathetic career but an entire hidden syndicate of massive corporate corruption. I was no longer merely defending my stolen inheritance. I was actively hunting apex predators. The private executive suite occupying the absolute top floor was completely silent and heavily guarded by a single, imposing security director who simply nodded as I confidently approached the entrance. Mr. Vance was standing rigidly by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sprawling Seattle skyline with a terrifying posture of absolute violently contained fury. He turned slowly when the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, his piercing dark eyes silently demanding an immediate, flawless explanation for my unprecedented and bold intrusion. I did not waste a single, precious breath on standard corporate pleasantries, cautious introductions, or nervous apologies. I simply placed my open laptop directly onto his massive mahogany desk, quickly typed in my decryption password, and turned the glowing screen directly toward his chest. Your regional vendor budget is not just bleeding from a single, isolated wound inflicted by a foolish mid-level manager, I stated firmly, pointing directly at the highlighted offshore routing numbers blazing in neon red across the complex spreadsheet. Chloe is completely unqualified to build a financial laundering network of this immense, sophisticated magnitude. She is merely the loudest, most incredibly arrogant pawn in a massive executive embezzlement ring actively operating right under your nose. The secondary authorization signatures on these massive international wire transfers belong exclusively to your senior vice president. They are actively bleeding your logistics empire dry to secretly fund untraceable offshore accounts, and they are brilliantly using my greedy, status-obsessed sister as their disposable corporate shield. Mr. Vance stared at the undeniable, concrete mathematical proof of his most trusted executive's profound financial betrayal for a long, utterly suffocating minute. The terrifying silence in the massive luxury office grew incredibly heavier with every passing second, but his sharp facial expression remained completely carved from solid granite. He slowly reached out and closed my laptop with a quiet, devastatingly decisive click, his brilliant mind already calculating the massive legal fallout of publicly destroying his own senior leadership team. If I hand this explosive data over to aggressive federal prosecutors right now, our global stock price will completely collapse by tomorrow morning, he murmured coldly, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. I need the absolute entirety of this criminal network meticulously documented and quietly dismantled before I bring down the final legal hammer. I can surgically map the entire corrupt syndicate within exactly 72 hours, but I require absolute unquestioned administrative control over your entire global network architecture. I countered smoothly, instantly seizing the massive power shift rapidly occurring within the tense room. I was no longer a desperate, recently homeless accountant begging for a temporary shadow auditing assignment to settle a petty family score. I was currently the only highly qualified person standing between his multi-billion-dollar empire and total public devastation. Mr. Vance looked at me with a newfound, chilling level of deep professional respect, pulling a specialized black titanium keycard from his tailored suit jacket and sliding it deliberately across the polished wood of his desk. You now possess the absolute highest level of security clearance in this entire building, Harper, he declared with absolute, terrifying finality, completely removing any remaining institutional barriers. Do not just map their pathetic network. I want you to actively freeze every single hidden corporate asset, trap their stolen funds in permanent escrow accounts and systematically destroy their financial ability to escape the country. Burn the entire corrupt operation completely to the ground, and ensure you leave absolutely zero survivors. I pocketed the heavy titanium card with a slow, calculating nod, feeling an immense, intoxicating rush of pure operational power violently flooding through my veins. The game had officially escalated far beyond a pathetic family dispute over a stolen grandmother's house. Returning to my bleak highway motel room felt entirely different now. I was a fully authorized corporate executioner actively operating out of a hidden digital bunker. I immediately booted up my laptop and initiated a massive, automated lockdown sequence specifically targeting the senior vice president's offshore dummy accounts, effectively severing their primary financial artery. As the complex decryption software relentlessly chewed through their pathetic digital firewalls, I briefly checked my sister's highly public social media feeds to monitor the localized damage. The absolute glorious chaos I had initiated earlier that morning at the floral boutique was now violently cascading through her entire fabricated, luxury existence. Chloe had just posted a tearful, deeply panicked live video from the front leather seat of her expensive car. Her flawless, deeply arrogant facade was completely crumbling in real time for all her thousands of dedicated followers to witness with gleeful fascination. She hysterically claimed that a massive banking error had temporarily frozen all her accounts, tearfully begging her exclusive wedding vendors for basic patience and professional understanding. The brutal comments section was an absolute bloodbath of mocking laughter and vicious, highly accurate rumors, with anonymous catering staff actively leaking the humiliating story of her violently screaming at the florist. Her wealthy, oblivious fiancé was visibly arguing with someone loudly on his cell phone in the background of the shaky video, clearly demanding to know why their elite country club venue was actively threatening to cancel their massive reservation today. My mother had also desperately attempted to reach me, leaving over 20 frantic, hysterical voicemails on my completely blocked secondary phone line. Through a specialized, automated transcription software, I read her pathetic, rapidly escalating demands for me to immediately secure a high-interest payday loan to save their precious social reputation from total ruin. They had legally stolen my beloved grandmother's house and ruthlessly drained my entire decade of grueling savings specifically to fund this exact public spectacle, and now they were helplessly trapped beneath the crushing weight of their own monumental greed. I felt absolutely zero human sympathy as I systematically deleted every single desperate voice message without listening to a single second of her pathetic, manipulative crying. I turned my complete, undivided attention back to the massive Vance Corporation global servers, meticulously preparing to execute the most devastating financial trap of my entire professional career. Chloe and the corrupt senior vice president genuinely believed they were successfully conducting a brilliant, entirely untraceable corporate heist, completely unaware that the heavy steel vault doors were currently locking permanently shut directly behind them. Tomorrow morning, Chloe was proudly scheduled to host a massive, heavily catered corporate luncheon specifically meant to showcase her fake consulting firm to the rest of the executive board. It was the absolute perfect, highly public stage for me to finally detonate the explosive legal bomb I had been meticulously building all week. The grand ballroom of the elite downtown hotel was decorated with hundreds of imported white orchids, a sickeningly lavish display funded entirely by stolen corporate logistics budgets. I stood quietly near the heavy mahogany entrance doors, wearing my simple dark blazer, completely invisible among the crowd of wealthy executives and high-ranking regional managers. Chloe stood triumphantly at the front of the massive room, wearing a custom-tailored designer suit that cost more than my entire stolen emergency savings account. She was holding a crystal champagne flute, laughing loudly with the senior vice president as they prepared to officially present their completely fabricated consulting firm to the global executive board. My mother was sitting proudly at a prime VIP table located directly near the main stage, wearing an expensive imported silk dress and loudly bragging to the wives of several prominent corporate directors about her youngest daughter's immense, self-made financial success. They had ruthlessly stolen my beloved grandmother's house, thrown all my personal belongings into the freezing mud, and completely drained my entire decade of grueling financial savings just to secure their prominent seats at this sickening table of lies. I did not wait for the arrogant introductory speeches to begin. Slipping unnoticed past the distracted catering staff who were busy serving imported caviar and vintage wine, I walked directly to the main audio and visual control booth positioned discreetly at the back of the massive ballroom. The young audiovisual technician tried to physically block my path, but I simply flashed the black titanium executive keycard Mr. Vance had personally given me yesterday. The technician instantly paled, recognizing the absolute highest level of corporate security clearance, and immediately stepped aside, granting me absolute, uncontested access to the central presentation servers. I plugged my heavily encrypted silver hard drive directly into the main console, permanently overriding Chloe's carefully curated slideshow of fake corporate synergy. The massive digital projector screen dominating the front of the ballroom flickered sharply, abruptly cutting off a brightly colored promotional video about supply chain innovation. A collective, deeply confused murmur rippled through the crowded room as the giant screen suddenly displayed a massive, highly detailed forensic accounting spreadsheet. I had meticulously highlighted the fraudulent offshore routing numbers and the massive illegal wire transfers in bright, screaming neon red. At the very top of the undeniable document, the name of Chloe's fake consulting firm was clearly linked directly to her own personal bank accounts and the senior vice president's digital authorization signatures. I did not stop there. I rapidly clicked through the presentation slides, projecting the itemized luxury receipts for Chloe's lavish bachelorette party in Napa Valley right next to the fraudulent corporate expense reports she had deliberately filed under the guise of an executive team building. Retreat. Turn that off immediately. Chloe shrieked violently, dropping her expensive crystal champagne flute onto the polished marble floor where it shattered into 100 jagged pieces. She pointed frantically at the terrified technician, her face turning an ugly blotchy shade of purple. Security, remove that woman from the control booth right now. She is a disgruntled, mentally unstable former accountant trespassing on a highly classified private corporate event. Two burly security guards immediately stepped forward from the shadows, but they abruptly froze in their tracks as the heavy mahogany entrance doors swung violently open. Alexander Vance walked slowly into the dead-silent ballroom, radiating an aura of absolute, terrifying corporate lethality. He did not yell, nor did he look remotely panicked by the massive financial scandal actively broadcasting across the giant projector screen. He simply adjusted his tailored silk tie and looked directly at his sweating, visibly pale senior vice president. "She is not trespassing, Chloe," Mr. Vance stated, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the frozen, utterly silent room. "Harper is my newly appointed independent forensic auditor, and she is currently presenting the final results of a massive internal fraud investigation. It appears you and my trusted vice president have been violently bleeding my logistics empire dry to secretly fund luxury floral arrangements and untraceable offshore accounts." The absolute, crushing horror of the situation finally registered on the face of Chloe's wealthy fiancé, who was standing completely frozen near the front stage. He stared intensely at the massive spreadsheet, his eyes locking onto the legal registration documents of the fake consulting firm. "You registered this massive fraudulent shell company under my legal middle name?" he asked, his voice trembling with pure, unadulterated terror. "You deliberately made me an active legal accomplice to a multi-million-dollar federal embezzlement ring just to pay for a luxury wedding reception?" Chloe desperately reached out to grab his tailored suit jacket, sobbing hysterically and begging him to listen to her completely fabricated excuses. He violently shoved her hands away, his face twisted in absolute disgust and genuine legal panic. He did not hesitate for a single second. He turned his back on his weeping, utterly humiliated bride and walked rapidly out of the grand ballroom, loudly pulling out his cell phone to immediately contact his aggressive team of defense attorneys. At the VIP table, my mother had turned the color of chalk, aggressively clutching her expensive designer purse as the wealthy wives around her suddenly physically recoiled in absolute disgust. The lavish, perfect social kingdom my mother and sister had ruthlessly destroyed my life to build was now actively burning to the ground in front of hundreds of silent, judging witnesses. The piercing wail of approaching police sirens began echoing loudly through the downtown city streets, growing rapidly closer by the second. Mr. Vance had completely bypassed standard corporate security protocols and directly contacted the federal authorities before he even left his luxury office suite this morning. The senior vice president desperately attempted to slip quietly out the side emergency exit, but two grim-faced plainclothes federal detectives were already waiting firmly in the narrow hallway with heavy steel handcuffs. Chloe collapsed completely onto the floor amidst the crushed white orchids and broken crystal glass, her custom designer suit ruined, screaming loudly for our mother to somehow magically save her from this absolute, inescapable nightmare. My mother desperately tried to rush toward the stage, but a stern female federal agent immediately blocked her path, demanding to see her identification. I stood perfectly still in the dark, quiet shadows of the control booth, watching the federal officers formally read my weeping sister her constitutional rights. They had successfully stolen my beloved grandmother's house and violently thrown me onto the freezing street just to fund a pathetic, temporary illusion of elite corporate wealth, completely forgetting that I was the exact person who engineered the heavy steel trap currently closing permanently around her wrists. Now, Chloe was heading to a concrete federal holding cell, and I finally needed to deal directly with the arrogant, manipulative woman who had happily handed her the legal crowbar to destroy my life in the very first place. The sterile, aggressively bright waiting room of the downtown Seattle Federal Detention Center smelled faintly of cheap bleach and stale coffee, providing an incredibly harsh contrast to the fragrant white orchids of the morning ballroom. I sat calmly on a hard plastic chair, holding a warm paper cup of black coffee while actively reviewing a secondary digital audit on my secure laptop. My mother burst through the heavy glass entrance doors looking completely unrecognizable. Her imported silk dress was severely wrinkled, her expensive makeup was streaked with desperate tears, and her signature aura of terrifying aristocratic authority had completely evaporated. She frantically scanned the crowded room until her bloodshot eyes finally locked onto my calm, seated figure. She did not walk, she practically sprinted across the scuffed linoleum floor, her expensive designer heels clicking frantically echoing off the cinderblock walls. "Harper, you have to call Mr. Vance right this exact second and tell him this was all a massive, ridiculous misunderstanding," she demanded breathlessly, her voice shaking with a pathetic mixture of lingering arrogance and absolute, undeniable terror. "Chloe is locked in a concrete holding cell with violent criminals. You proved your petty little point, So now you need to fix this nightmare before they officially process her fingerprints into the permanent federal database. I slowly took a deliberate sip of my bitter coffee, completely ignoring her frantic, wildly gesturing hands. Mr. Vance does not control the federal justice system, Mother, I explained with a cold, practiced corporate monotone. Chloe did not simply steal a few office supplies. She actively facilitated a massive, multi-million-dollar international money laundering syndicate. She is currently facing several decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary. And there is absolutely no corporate manager in the world who can magically erase that level of catastrophic federal crime. My mother slammed her hands desperately onto the small plastic table separating us, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated denial. Then we will simply hire the absolute best, most vicious defense attorneys in the entire Pacific Northwest, she hissed venomously, completely refusing to accept the brutal reality of the situation. I still have all the liquid cash from the sale of your grandmother's estate safely resting in the joint savings account. I will happily spend every single penny of that real estate money to legally destroy anyone who dares to prosecute my youngest daughter. A slow, genuinely chilling smile spread across my face as I gently closed my laptop screen. This was the exact, devastating moment I had been meticulously anticipating since the afternoon she threw my personal belongings into the freezing mud. You clearly do not understand how federal asset forfeiture actually works in a massive corporate embezzlement investigation, I stated softly, leaning forward so she could hear every single devastating syllable. When I officially flagged Chloe's entire financial network for severe internal fraud yesterday morning, the federal authorities immediately traced every single wire transfer associated with her name. The color began draining rapidly from my mother's face as the terrifying legal implications slowly began to penetrate her thick wall of denial. You deliberately transferred the massive proceeds from my stolen house directly into Chloe's primary checking account, I continued, my voice dripping with lethal precision. Unfortunately for you, that is the exact same checking account Chloe actively used to process the fraudulent corporate consulting fees. Because you foolishly commingled your stolen real estate funds with heavily laundered corporate blood money, the federal government has permanently frozen the entire account. The money is completely gone, Mother. You are officially, completely destitute. No, that is entirely impossible, she whispered hoarsely, her trembling hands slowly sliding off the plastic table. That was a legally binding real estate transaction. They cannot simply confiscate my private family money without a formal civil trial. I have elite country club membership fees due tomorrow. I have a massive luxury hotel suite booked for the next 3 weeks. I cannot be broke. They absolutely can, and they already did, I countered ruthlessly, effectively throwing her exact previous legal arrogance directly back into her face. As a certified corporate accountant, I understand the absolute, devastating power of federal asset seizure. But your profound financial ruin is not even your biggest problem right now. The aggressive federal agents currently interrogating Chloe are extremely interested in the sudden, massive influx of hundreds of thousands of dollars into her flagged account just weeks before the lavish wedding. They do not believe you simply sold a house to fund a party. They firmly believe you are an active, senior accomplice in the international money laundering syndicate. My mother physically collapsed into the empty plastic chair beside my table, violently gasping for air as if the oxygen had been suddenly sucked directly out of the sterile room. Her expensive designer purse dropped heavily onto the scuffed floor, spilling luxury cosmetics and useless gold credit cards across the dirty linoleum. You have to tell them the truth, Harper, she sobbed hysterically, her previous arrogant demands instantly transforming into pathetic, broken begging. You have to testify that I merely used your legal power of attorney to sell the property. You have to formally assure the aggressive federal prosecutors that I knew absolutely nothing about Mr. Vance or the stolen corporate logistics budget. If I testify, I will simply confirm that you aggressively weaponized a sweeping legal document to forcefully render your own daughter homeless in the freezing rain, I replied with absolute, chilling finality. You proudly warned me on my ruined front lawn that the authorities would never intervene against a legally binding signature. You were entirely correct about the law, Mother. You voluntarily signed the bank transfer documents moving that real estate money into a massive federal crime syndicate account. You built this catastrophic trap entirely by yourself, and you know the authorities will never intervene against a legally binding signature. She covered her face with her trembling hands, weeping loudly and uncontrollably in the middle of the crowded federal waiting room. She had sacrificed my entire life, my home, and my decade of savings upon the altar of her youngest daughter's toxic vanity. Now, the absolute crushing weight of her own monumental greed had finally trapped her in an inescapable legal nightmare. I felt absolutely zero sympathy for the sobbing, broken woman sitting beside me. I slowly stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my dark blazer, and picked up my secure laptop. "Do not attempt to contact me again," I stated quietly, looking down at her one final time. "I have a highly classified executive meeting with Mr. Vance this afternoon to officially discuss my permanent role as his new Senior Director of Internal Auditing. I highly suggest you use your one allotted phone call to find a cheap public defender." I turned my back on her miserable, echoing sobs and walked confidently out the heavy glass doors, stepping freely into the bright, crisp afternoon sunlight. The toxic family chains that had bound me for my entire adult life were finally permanently shattered. The sheer, intoxicating weight of the solid mahogany doors leading into the former senior vice president's luxury corner office felt incredibly satisfying beneath my hands. Less than 1 week ago, I was aggressively thrown out of my beloved grandmother's house into the freezing Seattle rain, completely stripped of my entire financial safety net. Today, I was officially standing inside the absolute epicenter of Vance Corporation's global logistics empire, holding the unrestricted executive access codes to a multi-billion-dollar corporate budget. Alexander Vance had not merely promoted me to the Senior Director of Internal Auditing. He had effectively handed me a violently sharpened corporate guillotine. My first official executive directive was to ruthlessly purge every single remaining loyalist connected to the massive embezzlement ring. I sat behind the massive imported marble desk, methodically terminating the employment contracts of 12 mid-level regional managers who had deliberately ignored Chloe's blatantly fraudulent vendor invoices. I did not offer them generous severance packages, nor did I grant them the quiet dignity of a voluntary corporate resignation. I had corporate security physically escort them out of the towering glass building holding pathetic cardboard boxes, violently mirroring the exact, degrading experience my own family had forced upon me. My phone buzzed sharply with a highly encrypted message from the lead federal prosecutor handling the massive financial corruption case. They urgently requested my physical presence at the federal courthouse, officially recognizing me as the primary corporate representative for Vance Corporation. The aggressive legal battle had rapidly escalated over the past 48 hours, and the federal investigators needed my specialized forensic accounting expertise to finally break my sister's remaining stubborn defenses. I grabbed my worn leather briefcase and headed directly down to the waiting luxury black town car, completely prepared to witness the absolute destruction of Chloe's fabricated reality. The federal interrogation room was aggressively sterile, featuring a heavy steel table bolted securely to the concrete floor and a massive two-way mirror covering the entire back wall. I did not hide behind the dark glass like a passive, frightened witness. I walked directly into the freezing room, my expensive new tailored suit standing in incredibly sharp contrast to the hideous, oversized gray prison jumpsuit Chloe was currently wearing. Her imported silk wedding gown and her arrogant social media empire had been violently replaced by heavy steel handcuffs and absolute, crushing legal terror. Chloe physically recoiled when I calmly pulled out a metal chair and sat directly across from her at the interrogation table. Her face was completely devoid of her expensive luxury makeup, revealing dark, exhausted circles under her wildly panicked eyes. She still genuinely believed she was merely the unfortunate victim of a terrible corporate misunderstanding, desperately clinging to the pathetic hope that her senior vice president would magically hire elite defense attorneys to save her. She had absolutely no idea that her wealthy corporate mentor was currently sitting in a separate federal holding cell, actively blaming the entire massive criminal operation completely on her. "You have absolutely no right to be in this restricted room, Harper," Chloe hissed defensively, her voice trembling with a pathetic mixture of remaining arrogance and deep exhaustion. "My elite legal team is currently filing a massive civil lawsuit against the corporation for wrongful termination and emotional distress. You are just a pathetic, jealous older sister trying to ruin my perfect luxury wedding because you are completely alone." I did not react to her venomous, entirely delusional insults. I simply unlatched my leather briefcase and slowly slid a thick, heavily bound forensic audit report directly across the cold steel table. "You do not have an elite legal team, Chloe," I stated with absolute, chilling calmness. Your wealthy fiancé immediately canceled the wedding, formally severed all legal ties, and fully cooperated with the federal authorities to protect his own inherited wealth. Your mother currently cannot afford a basic public defender because the federal government permanently seized her entire stolen real estate account. You are entirely, completely alone. Chloe stared blankly at the thick audit report, her trembling hands slowly reaching out to open the heavy cover. The very first page prominently displayed my official corporate signature directly beneath the title of lead forensic auditor. The absolute, crushing realization violently slammed into her exhausted mind as she frantically flipped through the incredibly detailed, color-coded spreadsheets. She finally saw exactly how every single fraudulent floral arrangement, every fake corporate retreat, and every massive offshore wire transfer had been meticulously tracked, recorded, and mathematically weaponized against her. You did this, she whispered in absolute, suffocating horror, her wide eyes darting wildly between my calm face and the devastating federal evidence. You were the anonymous internal investigator who froze my corporate cards. You engineered the massive digital trap at the luxury hotel. You deliberately let Mother transfer the stolen real estate money into a flagged criminal account just so the government would confiscate it. I simply allowed your own monumental, toxic greed to fully run its natural course. I replied smoothly, leaning slightly forward so she could hear every single devastating syllable. You arrogantly believed that stealing my physical sanctuary and draining my hard-earned savings would permanently break my spirit. You completely forgot that I am a master of auditing corporate parasites. You handed me the exact legal weapons I needed to completely burn your entire fabricated existence directly to the ground. I reached back into my briefcase and dropped a harsh ironclad plea agreement directly on top of the forensic audit. Your senior vice president is actively trying to pin the entire international money laundering syndicate on you and your mother, I stated coldly, delivering the federal prosecutor's exact message. He claims you two were the brilliant criminal masterminds who manipulated his executive authority. If you go to a formal federal trial, you will receive a mandatory sentence of 40 years in a maximum security prison. If you sign this immediate cooperation agreement and formally testify against him, they will recommend a reduced sentence of 15 years. Chloe collapsed violently forward, burying her face in her shackled hands as she began weeping with loud, ugly, uncontrollable sobs. The lavish, perfect corporate fairy tale she had ruthlessly destroyed my life to build had officially transformed into a terrifying, inescapable federal nightmare. She was desperately trapped between an aggressive billionaire executive who wanted to destroy her and a cold, calculating sister who had already successfully ruined her. I slowly stood up from the cold metal table, feeling absolutely zero remorse for the broken, hysterical woman crying pitifully in front of me. I secured my briefcase and walked calmly toward the heavy steel door, ready to return to my powerful new executive office. You have exactly 1 hour to sign the federal agreement, Chloe, I said quietly, without looking back. Enjoy your new concrete sanctuary. Sitting in my sprawling corner office overlooking the rain-slicked Seattle skyline, I watched the encrypted corporate server continuously update the massive federal legal filings. It took exactly 42 minutes for Chloe's fragile, entirely fabricated loyalty to completely shatter under the crushing weight of a maximum security prison sentence. My encrypted office phone rang with a direct line to the lead federal prosecutor, who formally confirmed that my sister had eagerly signed the ironclad cooperation agreement. Chloe had officially confessed to every single fraudulent corporate transaction, completely throwing both the senior vice president and our own mother directly under the heavy wheels of the federal justice system. She had meticulously detailed how our mother knowingly transferred the stolen real estate funds to actively shield the laundered corporate money, desperately trading her own family's freedom for a reduced 15-year federal sentence. The federal legal machinery moved with terrifying, absolute precision once they secured a sworn confession from a central corporate conspirator. Because my mother was officially classified as an active flight risk who possessed potential access to hidden offshore accounts, the federal judge immediately signed a sweeping arrest warrant. I could have simply stayed in my luxurious executive suite, sipping expensive imported black coffee while the armed agents quietly handled the degrading physical arrest. However, I needed to personally witness the absolute final collapse of the toxic matriarch who had ruthlessly orchestrated my temporary homelessness. I smoothly pulled on my tailored wool coat and instructed my private corporate driver to head directly toward the most exclusive, heavily guarded country club in the entire Pacific Northwest. My mother had spent her entire adult life aggressively worshipping elite social status, constantly sacrificing basic human decency to desperately impress wealthy strangers. According to the live location tracking data the federal investigators had legally pulled from her cellular provider, she was currently sitting in the lavish main dining room of the prestigious club. She was apparently refusing to accept her profound financial ruin, desperately attempting to leverage her rapidly decaying social connections to secure an emergency private loan. I walked calmly through the grand mahogany entrance of the elite establishment, flashing my heavy executive corporate credentials to bypass the nervous security staff just as two dark federal vehicles aggressively pulled onto the pristine front lawn. The atmosphere inside the opulent, crystal chandeliered dining room was incredibly tense, filled with the hushed, deeply uncomfortable whispers of Seattle's wealthiest elite. My mother was standing near a massive marble fireplace, wearing the exact same wrinkled silk dress from yesterday, aggressively cornering a highly uncomfortable commercial real estate developer. Her usually flawless, terrifying composure was completely gone, replaced by the frantic, deeply pathetic begging of a woman who finally realized she was entirely trapped. She was loudly demanding a massive cash advance, arrogantly promising to repay the loan the exact second her frozen bank accounts were magically cleared of the ridiculous federal fraud charges. I simply need enough liquid capital to hire a proper defense team and maintain my primary hotel suite, she insisted loudly, her shrill voice echoing terribly across the silent, staring room. My youngest daughter is currently the victim of a massive corporate conspiracy, and I will absolutely not allow my prestigious family name to be dragged through the mud by some jealous federal bureaucrats. Her desperate, highly public delusion was violently shattered as four grim-faced federal agents marched aggressively into the elegant dining room, their heavy tactical boots loud against the polished hardwood floors. The wealthy club members immediately scattered, physically recoiling from my mother as if she were carrying a highly contagious, lethal disease. The lead agent did not politely ask her to step outside or offer her a quiet, dignified exit away from her precious social peers. He loudly announced her full legal name and immediately read the devastating federal indictment for international money laundering and corporate conspiracy, effectively broadcasting her monumental crimes to the entire Pacific Northwest elite. "Turn around and place your hands firmly behind your back," the federal agent ordered sharply, pulling heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "You are officially under federal arrest." My mother let out a horrific, entirely unhinged scream, violently dropping her expensive designer purse as the cold steel loudly clicked shut around her trembling wrists. She frantically scanned the sea of disgusted wealthy faces desperately begging her former social circle to intervene, but they simply stared at her with cold, calculating apathy. It was the exact same chilling apathy she had proudly displayed when she stood on my ruined front lawn and watched the movers throw my entire life into the freezing mud. Her frantic eyes finally locked directly onto me, standing quietly and comfortably near the heavy mahogany entrance doors. "Harper, tell them this is a mistake," she shrieked hysterically, physically struggling against the strong grip of the federal agents. "Tell them I had absolutely nothing to do with Chloe's corporate consulting firm. I am your mother, and you legally owe me your absolute protection." I slowly walked forward, closing the physical distance until I was standing just a few feet away from her ruined, deeply pathetic figure. I did not raise my voice, nor did I show a single ounce of emotional weakness. "Chloe already told them absolutely everything, Mother," I stated with a cold, surgical precision that instantly silenced her screaming. "She signed a formal federal plea agreement exactly 1 hour ago. To save herself from a 40-year prison sentence, she explicitly testified that you actively helped her launder the stolen corporate logistics budget through my stolen real estate funds. Your favorite, perfect daughter completely sold you out to the federal government." The absolute, world-shattering betrayal finally registered in her wide, panicked eyes, completely breaking whatever fragile sanity she had left clinging to. The toxic alliance they had formed to ruthlessly destroy my life had violently turned inward, aggressively cannibalizing itself the exact second the intense legal pressure was applied. I watched silently as the federal agents forcefully marched my weeping, completely destroyed mother out the heavy oak doors and shoved her directly into the back of a waiting armored vehicle. The brilliant, flawlessly executed corporate trap was now completely shut, leaving me standing alone as the absolute uncontested victor of a war I never originally asked to fight. The towering glass walls of the primary executive boardroom at Vance Corporation offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the gloomy Seattle skyline, but my absolute focus remained locked on the terrified men sitting across the massive mahogany table. The smug local real estate agent who had so happily handed my grandmother's keys to Chloe exactly 1 week ago was currently sweating profusely through his cheap polyester suit. Sitting directly beside him was a senior regional manager from J.P. Morgan Chase, a man who had officially authorized the rapid, highly suspicious liquidation of my private estate. I did not offer them bottled water or polite corporate pleasantries. I simply sat at the absolute head of the massive table, surrounded by 3 of Alexander Vance's most vicious, high-priced corporate litigation attorneys. The federal government has officially classified the recent sale of my grandmother's estate as a direct, active component of a massive international money laundering syndicate, I stated with cold, practiced precision, my voice echoing sharply in the silent room. My mother deliberately used a weaponized power of attorney to fraudulently liquidate the property, immediately transferring the massive proceeds into a flagged criminal account heavily monitored by federal investigators. That transaction was completely legal and notarized. The real estate agent stammered weakly, desperately attempting to salvage his rapidly crumbling professional reputation. We had absolutely no idea the family funds were connected to any sort of corporate embezzlement ring. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense when you are actively holding a toxic, federally seized asset, I countered smoothly, sliding a thick stack of aggressively drafted legal documents across the polished wood. Because the buyer's funds were immediately commingled with laundered corporate blood money within 24 hours of the closing, the federal authorities are preparing to permanently freeze your entire brokerage firm pending a massive, multi-year criminal investigation. Your banking branch is also formally listed on the federal subpoena. The bank manager visibly paled, his eyes darting frantically toward the silent, intimidating corporate attorneys flanking me. They did not need to speak a single word. Their mere physical presence represented billions of dollars in aggressive legal firepower completely dedicated to my personal cause. I was no longer a desperate, weeping victim being forcefully thrown out onto a muddy front lawn. I was the senior director of internal auditing for a global logistics empire, and I was actively using my immense corporate authority to violently bend the civil legal system entirely to my absolute will. You have exactly 2 distinct choices today, I continued relentlessly, tapping a heavy gold pen against the crisp signature line. You can voluntarily void the original fraudulent sale right now, instantly annulling the contract and returning the absolute property deed directly to my name. If you choose this path, Vance Corporation will formally shield your respective businesses from the ongoing federal asset forfeiture investigation. Alternatively, you can arrogantly refuse, and I will happily allow the federal government to completely dismantle your careers in a highly public, entirely devastating civil trial. The bank manager did not hesitate for a single second. He practically ripped his expensive pen from his tailored jacket pocket and aggressively signed the thick annulment documents, legally voiding the bank's involvement in the catastrophic sale. He desperately shoved the heavy paperwork toward the sweating real estate agent, silently demanding his immediate compliance. The agent trembled visibly as he signed his full name, officially surrendering his massive, fraudulent commission to desperately save his own miserable legal standing. He reached slowly into his worn leather briefcase with shaking fingers and pulled out the familiar set of heavy brass keys. He did not toss them arrogantly into the air with a smug, self-satisfied grin like he had done for my sister just days ago. He slid them carefully across the smooth mahogany, refusing to even make direct eye contact with my cold, victorious stare. I calmly picked up the cold metal keys, feeling an immense, deeply intoxicating wave of pure justice wash over my entire body. The scorched earth cleanup phase of my operation was officially complete. My stolen sanctuary was legally mine once again. I left the towering corporate headquarters and instructed my private driver to take me directly back to the quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood I had been violently expelled from. The heavy Seattle rain had finally stopped, leaving the pristine streets smelling of fresh pine and wet asphalt. I walked slowly up the familiar concrete driveway, my expensive leather boots stepping right over the exact spot where Chloe had maliciously kicked my ruined personal documents into the freezing mud. The massive luxury wedding she had desperately tried to build on the ashes of my entire life had completely evaporated, leaving behind absolutely nothing but a devastating trail of shattered illusions and heavy federal indictments. Sliding the heavy brass key into the front door lock felt incredibly surreal, a quiet, monumental victory after a week of absolute chaos. The front door swung open with a familiar, comforting creak. The house was completely empty, entirely stripped of my beautiful antique furniture and personal belongings by the ruthless moving crew my mother had hired, but the profound, overwhelming silence inside felt absolutely magnificent. Every single echo of my footsteps against the bare hardwood floors represented a massive, deeply personal triumph against the toxic family members who had callously treated me like disposable garbage. They were currently sitting in separate, freezing concrete federal holding cells, desperately turning against each other in a pathetic attempt to save their own miserable lives, while I was standing safely inside the exact physical fortress they had tried so ruthlessly to permanently steal. I slowly walked into the empty living room, gently trailing my hand along the familiar painted walls, completely reclaiming the spiritual energy of my beloved grandmother's home. The intense, blinding rage that had aggressively fueled my meticulous corporate revenge had finally burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, unbreakable core of absolute strength. My secure corporate cell phone vibrated softly in the pocket of my tailored blazer, breaking the beautiful silence of the empty living room. It was an automated calendar alert confirming the official, highly anticipated federal sentencing hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. I had successfully reclaimed my physical home, aggressively secured my elite professional future, and completely destroyed the massive corporate embezzlement ring. But the story was not entirely finished. I still needed to walk into that crowded federal courtroom and look my mother and sister directly in their weeping eyes one final time as the heavy steel doors of justice locked permanently behind them. The towering granite pillars of the downtown Seattle federal courthouse looked incredibly imposing against the bright morning sky, but I felt absolutely no fear as I walked up the massive concrete steps. A chaotic swarm of aggressive local journalists and eager corporate reporters frantically flashed their heavy camera lenses, desperate to capture the final conclusion of the massive Vance Corporation financial scandal. Alexander Vance walked closely beside me, flanked by his elite corporate security team, his terrifying presence effortlessly parting the screaming media circus like a sharp blade. I was wearing a meticulously tailored, imported charcoal suit, projecting the absolute, terrifying authority of a senior corporate executive who had successfully dismantled a multi-million-dollar criminal syndicate. We entered the heavily guarded, profoundly silent federal courtroom and took our prominent seats directly behind the aggressive team of federal prosecutors. The heavy wooden side door loudly groaned open, and two armed federal marshals forcefully escorted my mother and sister into the massive room. The horrific, deeply satisfying contrast between their current reality and their former fabricated luxury was absolutely staggering. Chloe and my mother were both wearing hideous, oversized gray prison jumpsuits, their wrists securely bound by heavy steel chains that clanked loudly against the polished hardwood floor. My mother's previously immaculate, aggressively dyed hair was completely gray and desperately unkempt, her arrogant aristocratic posture entirely broken beneath the crushing weight of her massive federal indictment. They both flinched violently when they finally saw me sitting calmly in the front row, radiating absolute, untouchable power. The stern federal judge formally called the massive courtroom to order, immediately requesting my physical presence at the central wooden podium to deliver the official corporate and personal victim impact statement. I did not carry any printed notes, nor did I need to nervously read from a prepared legal script. I walked confidently to the center of the silent room, adjusting the small microphone and looking directly down at the terrified, weeping women who had ruthlessly attempted to destroy my entire existence exactly 2 weeks ago. Your Honor, the two women sitting before you did not merely commit a highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar corporate financial crime, I began, my voice perfectly steady and echoing clearly across the massive courtroom. They committed an incredibly vicious, deeply calculated emotional betrayal against their own flesh and blood. My mother aggressively weaponized a sweeping legal power of attorney to fraudulently sell my beloved grandmother's estate, permanently rendering me homeless in the freezing rain. She deliberately commingled those stolen family funds with massive, illegal offshore wire transfers simply to protect a massive corporate embezzlement ring. I paused deliberately, letting the absolute, sickening reality of their monumental greed sink deeply into the silent courtroom. My younger sister Chloe utilized her trusted executive position at Vance Corporation to ruthlessly steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from her dedicated employer. She funneled that stolen corporate money into a completely fabricated logistics consulting firm, using the massive illegal profits to blindly fund an obscenely lavish luxury wedding reception. They happily threw my entire life, my home, and a decade of my grueling financial savings directly into the mud simply to purchase a temporary, pathetic illusion of elite social status. Chloe buried her pale, tear-stained face into her chained hands, sobbing loudly and uncontrollably as her massive, highly publicized crimes were officially laid bare before the federal court. My mother stared blankly at the polished wooden table, completely paralyzed by the absolute destruction of her precious social reputation. I am not standing here today to ask for your emotional sympathy, Your Honor, I concluded coldly, my eyes locking directly onto my weeping mother. I am standing here as the Senior Director of Internal Auditing for Vance Corporation and as a woman who successfully reclaimed her stolen life. I ask this federal court to show them the exact same merciless, brutal apathy they proudly showed me when they violently threw my personal belongings onto the freezing sidewalk. I stepped away from the heavy wooden podium and walked calmly back to my prominent seat, the silence in the massive courtroom feeling incredibly thick and suffocating. The federal judge adjusted his heavy reading glasses, looking down at the two broken women with an expression of pure, unadulterated judicial disgust. He did not offer them a single ounce of judicial leniency, nor did he entertain their pathetic, weeping apologies. He formally sentenced Chloe to a mandatory 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, strictly honoring her signed cooperation agreement but completely refusing to reduce a single extra day. He then turned his harsh, unforgiving gaze directly toward my trembling mother, reading the absolute maximum federal penalty for her massive, unapologetic role in the international money laundering syndicate. Because she had deliberately commingled stolen real estate funds and arrogantly attempted to leverage her social status to completely avoid prosecution, the judge ruthlessly slammed his heavy wooden gavel and sentenced her to 20 solid years in federal prison. My mother let out a horrific, entirely unhinged shriek of pure terror, violently struggling against the heavy steel chains as the armed federal marshals aggressively dragged her away from the defense table. "Harper, please. You have to fix this. I am your mother," she screamed hysterically, her desperate voice echoing terribly down the long, sterile prison hallway until the heavy steel doors slammed permanently shut, entirely severing her from the outside world forever. Chloe simply hung her head in absolute, crushing defeat, quietly following the armed marshals into the dark federal holding area without looking back. The massive, toxic nightmare they had actively built was officially, permanently over, their fabricated luxury kingdom entirely reduced to cold concrete and heavy iron bars. I walked out of the towering federal courthouse alongside Alexander Vance, stepping freely into the bright, incredibly warm Seattle afternoon sunlight. The aggressive media circus frantically shouted their eager questions, but we simply ignored them, stepping smoothly into the waiting luxury black town car. "You executed that entire corporate operation with absolute, terrifying perfection, Harper," Mr. Vance stated softly, handing me a crystal glass of incredibly expensive imported champagne. I smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks, raising my glass to toast the beautiful, sprawling city skyline. I was finally heading back to my reclaimed home, officially holding the absolute highest financial authority in a global corporate empire, entirely free to build a brilliant, unbreakable future perfectly designed by my own hands.